Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the reading of the one-shot entitled Seduction Gone Wrong, or Right? Here's the summary. In a matter of minutes, anyone could tell Midori Izuku was a nervous boy. He stuttered endlessly and became flustered as soon as a girl was too close. Truthfully, some people would call him hopeless in the world of romance and lust. That is until he takes part in one of Midnight's simulated undercover missions. Alternatively, Midori Izuku learns confidence and uses it against everyone. Let's be honest. Izuku didn't know where he went wrong. An hour ago, Aizawa-sensei was telling the class about a training simulation they were going to run tomorrow. The class will be split up into 2 groups, 10 and 10. You will not know your groups until tomorrow, so don't even ask. Each group will be participating as active heroes in search of a lone survivor in a massively destructed cityscape. The goal is to find them and take them to the finish line. Easy, right? Wrong. Here's the catch. One of your fellow group members will be an undercover villain, posing as a hero whose sole goal is to subdue the other heroes before the survivor is found. The third-year class has been stunned by the scenario. To even think about traitors amongst your own profession was terrifying, especially considering that their job was one that took down said traitors. They had only stayed like that for a minute, though, before murmurs broke out, their quirks drained away immediately after. The world of heroics includes betrayal, don't forget that. There will be people who will step on you in order to get what they want. All it takes is one person to bring down an entire organization. That being said, that's why we're doing the simulation. Unlike the villain's single goal, the heroes have 2. Find the survivor and discover the villain. Ideally, you'll figure it out who it is during the simulation and act accordingly. However, if you don't and still manage to find the survivor, you'll pass. May I remind some of you that this entire scenario relies on teamwork. At least half of your team has to survive in order to pass. If the villain is in your remaining team, undiscovered by the time you cross the finish line, you will not pass. Lastly, this entire exercise will be timed. You'll have 45 minutes. Midnight and I will be overseeing the trainings. Any questions? There had been a lot of questions, but there was only one that reigned any significance. How will the villain be picked? Tomorrow, I'll hand out colored cards to each team, red for one and blue for the other. 1 card in each group will have a black dot in the middle. The person with the dot will be the undercover villain in that group. No one will know if they are the villain until tomorrow morning. Now here was the problem. It was not tomorrow morning. Aizawa-sensei had lied about that part, a deliberate ruse that he would say, because Izuku here stands, an hour after class, being told that he's the undercover villain. I'm sorry, what? He stuttered out, blinking at every syllable. And this was when his internal spiral had started. Where had he gone wrong? He's a good student. Good enough. Surely not excelling in certain subjects, but doing well nonetheless. He works harder than anyone in all their training exercises and dutifully helps his classmates. He does his best to listen to Aizawa-sensei's constant reprimands, though he is deemed problem child for a reason. He tries to be heroic and kind in every aspect of his life, so why the hell is he being told already that he's going to play a villain? This has to be some kind of punishment for all the times that he broke a few rules. Federal laws. Yet the thing is, Izuku would have thought none of this if he was given the role tomorrow morning, like his class was told. But he's being told now, and that must mean something. His mind is swirling rapidly like a flush toilet toward worst-case scenarios and irrational explanations, so much so he misses the subtle grin on Aizawa-sensei's face. I'm telling you now that you'll be the villain for one of the groups tomorrow, his teacher says plainly with a hint of amusement that Izuku doesn't catch. But why are you telling me now? He asks, his voice is stretching the way it does when someone's out of breath. In all honesty, kid, this idea was all Kayama-san. He seems to huff out annoyance, though Izuku senses there's no real heat in it. She's the one who suggested it, and even worse, she specifically stated that she wanted you to be the undercover villain. Izuku's internal spiral clears for a second, to see the full blast smirk on Aizawa-sensei's face for it to just slam back harder. Because this is not some petty revenge plot made by his teacher. No, it's a meddlesome plot made by the R-rated pro-hero Midnight, and that's what makes his fears burst. It's not because he's scared of Kayama-sensei. No, of course not. He's always looked up to her air of confidence and all her self-assurity. The way she crafted her hero persona and used the inherent sexualization of female heroes to her advantage is something that he admires about her. But it's also the very thing that he's scared of. Sure, his hero persona has a kind of confidence, but it's nothing like Midnight's, where he stumbles daily over words, and he fills himself with doubt. She exudes self-confidence and reliance. She's not afraid to use her looks as a weapon. Meanwhile, Izuku has always been shy in that department. To hear that Kayama-sensei wanted him specifically to be the undercover traitor means something that Izuku can't even begin to comprehend. All he knows is that he's in for something. Hopefully something good, but at this point Izuku just wants to survive with the tiniest bit of his pride intact. His shoulders slack from their tense position as he finally gives up, accepting his fate. Don't look so down, kid. At the very least, you'll learn something valuable from her. Aizawa-sensei says ambiguously, though Izuku can tell his teacher already knows what's in store for him these next few hours. He was sent to one of the underground facilities Nezu had built, supposedly so none of his classmates could find him. As he stood in front of the large doors of the building, he couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Here goes nothing. It was a rather plain sight. In one corner was the typical exercise equipment, a punching bag, a treadmill, and the likes. In another, a small kitchen had resided, in which there was what Izuku could only assume was a stocked refrigerator and pantry. The only odd thing about the area was the extra padded mats layered all across the floor. When he looked up from them, Kayama-sensei had appeared from a door carrying what looked like a shoebox. She set the box onto the small kitchen table before walking to him, a bounce in her step. "Midoriya-kun, ready for your lesson?" she asked excitedly. Lesson? Aizawa-sensei didn't mention anything other than a location to him, so he was going into this blind. But something about the cushioned mats and the suspected shoebox was throwing him in a direction he was really hoping was wrong. Kayama-sensei comes up behind him and starts pushing him toward the center of the room. "And here I thought Shoto was going to ruin all my fun," she practically chirped. "You, Midoriya Izuku, are here for an impromptu and much-needed lesson in the world that is my specialty." He couldn't help the fearful swallow he took. He knew behind all those squirming thoughts earlier that this was why he was here. Clearly his teachers saw his dire need for confidence lessons, and clearly they thought this was the best way. Did they really have to ambush me like this, though? Come on. "Do I have to?" he murmurs, trying to muster up a last attempt at avoiding this situation. The hero behind him walks calmly in front of him, and he can feel her assessing stare. He meets her eyes in a desperate attempt to back up his question, but she just shrugs. I'm not going to force you. But if you want to pass the simulation, I suggest learning what I have to offer, Midoriya-kun. I promise you it's not all bad, and I can guarantee that these skills are going to do a lot more than you think they will against villains." She pauses, and Izuku's eyes widen at the growth of her mischievous smirk. "Especially against those classmates of yours." The way she says it makes a shudder ripple through his body. He doesn't want to think about what she means, but Izuku can put two and two together. If it'll make me a better hero. Isn't that what he's here for? To be a better hero? To save lives through any means? If he has to learn to use assets that he's hardly confident in, then so be it. If he has to sacrifice some of his pride, so be it. He's willing. He's not going to get anywhere by not learning everything he can from the heroes around him. He sucks up the remaining apprehension and gives Kayama-sensei a brilliant smile. "Okay, yeah. Let's do it." A spark of chaotic joy swirls in his teacher's eyes, and she pulls out a sharp grin. "That's the spirit. Now go put on those heels," she says as she points to the shoebox. All the confidence from his smile had pooled out of him, and his mouth drops open as he looks at her bewildered. "I'm sorry. What?" She looks at him with no pity, even as he stands there with his mouth openly catching flies, as she firmly places her hands on her hips, that spark in her eyes brightening by the second. "You heard me. That shoebox over there has a pair of heels in it, and you're going to put 'em on." He stands there completely baffled. Out of all the things that he expected out of this lesson, wearing heels was not one of them. Sure, he's seen men wear heels many times, but most of the time it's women who have the aptitude to wear them. From his mother, he knows that heels are basically the devil's creation, a shoe that's not for the weak, she says, and God's definitely a shoe that's made to be worn with confidence. If this lesson is evident enough, he clearly doesn't meet that requirement, so why the hell is he being told to wear them at the start of the lesson? "I'm sorry, Kayama-sensei, but I'm afraid I don't quite, understand why I'm wearing heels, now?" he timidly asks, and a blush is creeping up his neck. Her eyes narrow at him slightly, and he hunches over within himself. Her hand flies from her hip to the air, waving meaninglessly. "It's simple, really. You need confidence to pass the simulation, and we've only got a few hours. Why waste time trying to ease you into it when we can just throw you in and see how that works?" She gives him a knowing smile. "Besides, since when have you shied away from a challenge, Midoriya-kun?" That's when he knows that she's got him, because she's absolutely undeniably right. Izuku can't back down from a challenge. He didn't shy away from Muscular, even though he was severely outclassed. He didn't stay back in the hospital when Katan was kidnapped. He kept fighting even when his body was torn to shreds when he fought against Chisaki. If he couldn't back down from all of that, then he sure as hell wouldn't shy away from a pair of heels. "Give me the heels," he says firmly, eyeing her with a new determination. In retrospect, Maybe fighting all those villains wasn't so bad. The second he put on those bright red heels and took a step, he fell to his face. Now he finally understood what the extra padding was for. Kayama-sensei had laughed wholeheartedly at his fallen form before she decided to give him a break and help him stand. It had taken him an hour for him to truly be able to work it, as his teacher had said, always with a snap of her fingers. First things first, darling, walk in them. Imagine as if you're walking on tiptoes the entire time. The advice sounded easy enough. He got about 5 steps in before the heel of his left shoe had slipped out from under him, and he landed on his ass. He tried it again and again, until finally, after what felt like the 50th time, he had managed to walk all the way across the room. He awarded himself with a smile under Kayama-sensei's praise, but he should have known that this was not even the beginning. Now on to the real work. I want you to give me your best impression of a strut, kid. A strut? She looked so appalled at his question that he started frantically scratching his brain for what the word could mean. Before he could curl into more depths of his thoughts, Kayama-sensei decided to just give him a demonstration. Now pay attention. Ever the overanalyzer, his eyes followed her every movement with the kind of intrigue a kid would have when first introduced to a sugary dessert. The way her feet traveled right in front of each other in every step, a perfectly straight line, he noted. The careful yet magnetic swing of her hips, just the way they had moved like a figure 8, was mesmerizing. He was too busy analyzing to feel the burn of his cheeks. Her hands were placed softly at her sides, gliding in the air as she had no care in the world. However, what Izuku noticed the most of all was the look on her face. She practically glowed. Her small yet striking smile gave off the impression that she meant no harm, that she was but a mere woman with an eccentric way of moving. Her eyes, though, held a different story. 2 stories, to be precise. At first glance, the sparkle in them showed that she was a careful woman with a kindness that can do only good. But when you ignored that and you looked deeper in them, you could see the intent. Her sparkle became sharp, like a glint that could prick blood. It became a power that was so disguised by the way that she appeared that any unsuspecting person could easily fall within its clutches. A quiet utter of absolute fascination was the only thing that came off his tongue when she had stopped in front of him. "You see what I'm talking about, Midori-kun?" She smirked, that glint still in her eyes. "That's a strut, and what you're feeling right now is the kind of power it holds." He watched her walk all the way back to the far end of the room before she beckoned him to try it out. Took him a few attempts to get the footwork down. He kept tripping over his own feet, but once he got it down, it was like the hips came naturally. Though a bit clumsily, he managed to get his body to follow Kayama-sensei's example. His hips formed figure 8s, his steps revealed no hesitation, and his hands flew smoothly by his sides. "You're a quick learner, darling, but your expression's all wrong," she pointed out. Her painted nail tapped silently in thought on the corner of her chin. Izuku knew what she meant. He tried to mimic her shining appearance, but every time it came out sheepish and embarrassed. Kayama-sensei's ponder snapped out of her as she seemingly had a light-bulb moment. "Midori-kun, instead of trying to mimic me, try creating your own illustrious demeanor. Find something that fits you. What makes you confident? What do you think would catch people's attention?" What makes me confident? Well, the answer was saving people. However humble he is, Izuku knows he's pretty powerful and that he can use that to rescue others. He's confident in that. As for what makes him catch people's attention, his face explodes in color, and he tries to shield his face behind his curls. Kayama-sensei's gaze is set on him, and he can feel her amusement radiating off of her, but she says nothing. As oblivious as Izuku can be in the world of lust and attraction, he's not an idiot. At least when it comes to other people. He can't say the same thing about himself, but he knows who's attractive and who has attractive qualities. Take Todoroki-kun. He's the resident hottie, as Ashido calls him, and Izuku, no matter how much he blushes, will never deny that fact. The stormy gray and ocean blue of his eyes will always draw Izuku into a stuttering mess if he stares too long. Another solid example is Uraraka-kun. Whenever she flashes her shining smile or gently reassures him, it's like something lit him on fire. Her cute appearance paired with her overwhelming kindness is a sharp-edged blade to his heart. All this to say that Izuku knows what makes other people attractive. Now what makes him attractive? He truly thinks nothing. He's been told all his life that he's rather plain-looking, which is honestly a punch to the gut, but it came in handy when he was running from bullies, so you win some, you lose some. Since he's come to UA, though. The low mumbles of conversation in the kitchen, followed by giggles and red cheeks, the girls slapping hands over each other's mouths when he walked by. The sudden redness in the locker room when he's putting on his hero costume, the blushes he receives when he does something he considers normal and polite. It's hard to ignore those, no matter how naive he might be in his own love life. "Well," his teacher finally says. I think I got it, Kayama-sensei." His cheeks are still red, and the anxiety in his chest is still there, but Like always, he's pushing forward. Use everything you can, Izuku. So he does. He uses everything he learned behind those secret giggles and blushes from his peers, and he has to admit it feels pretty fucking good. At the end of his strut, a proud smirk emerges from Kayama-sensei, her eyes glinting in the way that ensures chaos for everyone but herself. He can't help the pride bursting in his chest. Here he thought he was going to lose pride, but instead he's gaining the confidence that he most definitely needed, another skill that he can use in his arsenal. A clap from her hands erupts into the quiet room as she leans on her hip and is pointing excitedly at him. That's what I call a strut, darling. Those poor classmates of yours aren't going to know what hit 'em. A malicious grin splits her face, and, despite what Izuku had just concurred, he gulps. Now, let's teach you how to flirt. Namuri was ecstatic. Simply put, her plan had gone better than expected. After 2 years of watching Midori Izuku stumble over his words and doubt himself, she'd had enough. If she, 18-plus pro-hero Midnight, could turn herself from an insecure high schooler to the confident gal she was today, then surely she could help Midori-kun do the same. So she devised a plan. It was rather easy, actually. It's not like this was some grand plot. Step 1. Give Shota a carefully planned training exercise that actually teaches a relevant skill. He couldn't deny the sheer logic behind it. Step 2. Make Shota give in to her demand that she pick the villains and assign the groups. That part wasn't at all hard, considering the man would happily take less work. The 50-pack box of juice packets also didn't hurt. Step 3. Choose Midori as one of the villains and mold him into the confident young man she believed he could be, and she was right. Once he was challenged, she knew he'd submit. The kid's hardcore goal of being the best hero he could possibly be is a powerful motivator, and Namuri knew exactly when to use it against him. A few hours and the kid was a weapon already. Step 4. Watch chaos explode at the hands of her meddling fingers. Call her a fun-loving sadist, but she was just jumping at the chance to witness students fall to the whims of seduction, especially at the hands of a boy who looked like he didn't have a dirty thought in his mind. As much as she wants to say that she devised this plan for the sole purpose of helping Midoriya, she knows that a part of her reasoning was to see the utter bafflement of his classmates and Shota. What can she say? Turning teenagers into hormonal messes at the hands of their peers was hilarious. Add in Shota's annoyed groaning and the mutters of, "I don't get paid enough for this shit," and she's sold. If she had to create that entertainment herself, then so be it. Let it not be mistaken that Namuri herself wants to create love or lust-sicken fools out of her students. Gods, no. That's a line that she'll never cross. But guiding her students to use that sort of weapon themselves for their own benefit was exactly what she wanted. These kids need to realize that the power of seduction and using your body to your advantage was a good thing. It's not dirty like some reporters or perverted men think. It's that kind of confidence in oneself that really changes the game. She wanted to show that to her students, and if some mischief is involved, then even better. And after teaching Midori-kun the tricks of the trade last night, Step 4 is about to come into fruition. She sneaks a glance at the boy in question as she passes out the blue cards to the class of 3A. Shota's passing out the red cards, the ones assigned to Midoriya's team. Namuri has to keep the excitement out of her face when she passes the last card. All right, kiddos. Blue cards find blue cards and red cards find red. Villains, remember you're undercover. Aizawa-san will be picking up your cards shortly after the groups form. The man beside her mutters something incoherent, though she guesses it's just his usual displeasure. As soon as the groups form, the underground hero whips around the room collecting the cards. He lands in a slouch next to her. You really wanted to get that over with, didn't you? She whispers lightheartedly. He side-eyes her as he shrugs. Why prolong their suffering? He adds with a smirk, in his voice that Namuri can recognize. So he knows what's in store. She smirks back, not bothering to hide it from the gazing students. Perfect. Her hands clap cheerfully, disguising the subtle wink that she gives to Midoriya. He gives her no reaction, ever the smart kid. Red team is up first. Head to the area, kids. As soon as the timer went off, Yaomomo suggested they split up. Kyoka, alongside her group of Midoriya, Bakugo, Todoroki, Sue, Uraraka, Kirishima, Kaminari, and Ida, abruptly stopped running. Bakugo was the first to object. Like hell we're splitting up. Give that traitor a chance to knock us off one by one. Not on my fucking watch. Suchan nodded alongside him, arguing that he had a point, while Kirishima and Dunsface pumped their fist in the air in agreement. Please hear me out. You see how expansive this city is. There's no way if we traveled in a group that we'd be able to clear it all and find the survivor. We have to split up and trust each other. Yaomomo had practically pleaded with them. Kyoka stood by her side and offered the same logistics, further explaining that 45 minutes was not nearly enough time to explore the destroyed city altogether. she could practically hear Bakugo's heart stammering angrily in his chest. Kyoka understands it may not be the best plan, but what choice did they have? Yaomomo brought up a good point. Bakugo started ranting about the stupidity of the plan, stomping his boots furiously at the ground, which irritated Kyoka so much she almost stabbed him with an ear of Jack. She could see Yaomomo was beginning to lose her willpower when Midoriya spoke up in an almost shy manner. "Why don't we split up into pairs? Sure, there's still a possibility of what Kachan, or Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite," he cringed, was saying, but maybe this way we can hold each other accountable. She had to admit what Midoriya was saying made sense. It was a little bit of both worlds. She secretly wished they could go in groups of 3, but with the even number it wouldn't work out either way. So Kyoka had glanced to her right to see the furrowed brows on her friend. Months of friendship told her that Yaomomo was beating herself up over not thinking of that. Kyoka gave her a sympathy pat on the shoulder, which seemed to bring her out of her state. "Yeah, like Deku-kun said, if one of us betrays our partner and goes looking for the others alone, then we'll know that they're the traitor," Uraraka clarified, seeming excited by the idea. Ever the leader, Ida raised his hand in a chopping motion and asked, "Does everyone agree to this proposition?" There were no disagreements within the group, but Kyoka could hear the painful grind of Bakugo's teeth. From there, they'd established their pairs. Kyoka and Midoriya, Kirishima and Kaminari, Sue and Ida, Yaomomo and Todoroki, and Uraraka and Bakugo. Rather unlikely pairs some of them were, but Kyoka didn't mind. In all honesty, she was fairly confident that Midoriya wasn't the traitor. The boy didn't know how to lie at all, and his heartbeat always gave him away. Kyoka would know. She could always hear if there was stammering in his chest whenever he tried to hide a truth. It wasn't faltering currently, and that's what made her relax a little as they broke off from the main group. She kept pace with them as they dashed east, toward the torn-down shopping mall. Distantly, she heard the patterned footsteps of Kirishima and Kaminari traveling a couple blocks east of their direction. From what she could see, the mall structure had a wide hole coming down the center of the roof. Rubble coated the entire landscape, and they had to jump over a few railings that had mysteriously been placed in front of the mall. Kyoka had no idea how those could have possibly landed there. They got inside the mall when Midoriya pointed his thumb in the direction of the destroyed clothing stores. "I'm gonna go check over there first. Do you mind checking the travel department stores across the way?" he asked, a small smile on his face. Kyoka recognized it as a part of his hero persona. "Sounds good, Deku. Holler if you find something," she says, a mimic of Midoriya's smile on her own lips. Inside the department store are scattered piles of tourist brochures and celebrity magazines. It's a mess so chaotic that Kyoka has to remind herself that this was carefully organized to look like this. She wasn't actually in an abandoned city. No one had actually died. Stepping over the piles, she pulls apart broken counters to look beneath in hopes that she finds a survivor, but to her disappointment, she finds nothing. Turning around, she shrieks when she finds a bloodied hand on the floor. She shines a light on it to see it's just a cloth dummy hand, and she sighs in relief. Gods, did they have to make this shit so realistic? She's about to walk up the department stairs when her ears catch Midoriya's shouts. "Earphone jack! I found something!" She can hear the anticipation in his tone, but something about the vibration is off. She talks it up to Hope and ignores it. She already ruled Midoriya out. Besides, if he really was the traitor, then surely he would have taken her out already. They were already down 6 minutes. Her footsteps come to a halt at the clothing store's entrance. Carefully, she shuffles through the debris and makes her way toward the sound of Midoriya's breathing. She turns the corner to see him leaning over something, and all of a sudden her face flushes. Her heart stammers in her own chest because what she's seeing is something her and the girls have definitely talked about multiple times. Even though his hero suit is relatively loose, the way that they're pulling at him now certainly begs a different story. Kyoka can see the outlines of Midoriya's thighs, and gods does she want to die. The way the pants are hugging them and practically showing off the muzzle is something that she and the girls fawned over endlessly after training exercises, and don't even get her started on another part of his body that the pants are hugging as well. The heat on her cheeks only get hotter as she stands silently staring at him, leaned over. A cough stutters out of her before she even knows it, and Midoriya stands up, turning toward her. He says something, but she hears nothing as the static in her brain crowds her eardrums. Something's changed about Midoriya from now and mere minutes ago. His heart still beats the same, that much she can tell, but there's something stronger about it, like it's telling her a message she can't decipher. And that's when she actually sees a change. She notices it when he walks toward her. The subtle sway of his hips. He's never done that before, but gods, Kyoka wishes he did. Maybe then she wouldn't be a blubbering mess right now, because the way the small movement makes his thighs appear fuller causes her to choke on whatever oxygen is trying to find solace in her chest. "Midoriya, what are you doing?" She can't even be bothered to say his hero name when she's too busy struggling to understand what exactly is happening. He stops right in front of her, and to her own absolute astonishment, he places his index finger on her chin and lifts her face to his. He may not be much taller, but Kyoka loses all sense anyway. She peers into those emerald eyes and sees nothing but kindness, much more lustrous and mischievous than she's ever noticed. It tugs at her heart, and she loses herself in the vastness of his expression. She wants more. She can't help it with the way that he's looking at her, like she truly matters, and he'll show her how much power she truly has. Kyoka doesn't even notice the white tape being pulled from Midoriya's pocket. All her attention is focused on his eyes, on the feel of his fingers on her chin. It's so overwhelming that she doesn't feel the tape being wrapped around her hands. It's only when he pulls away, and she sees a small grin, does she realize what had happened. Eijiro was smashing the wall to a run-down building when he heard the footsteps behind him. "Dude, you gotta come see this!" Kaminari shouted at him, waving his hands in the air excitedly. His attitude rubbed off on him, and soon enough Eijiro found himself running over to his friend. "What's up, man?" he asked as they ran side by side. His teammate explained how he was zapping the electric outlets in the building so he could turn on the lights in the darkened basement when he saw a hand peeking through the bottom of the door. "The problem is that I can't move the giant boulder in front of the door to see if there's a body. The thing's massive." He gave his friend a sharp-toothed smile and added, "That's why there's two of us." The building they reached was toppled in on itself. It seemed to be a residential building. If the trash cans in front of him were any sign, the trash itself had spilled onto the street, and Eijiro did his best not to step in any running liquid. He and Kaminari made it to the basement. Lights thankfully still powered on, and Eijiro let out a small curse. "You weren't kidding about the size of this rock, dude." Kaminari made an awkward chuckle, and he got the feeling that his friend was as lost as he felt. It's not that Eijiro or Kaminari weren't strong necessarily. They were plenty strong and could lift things well. The problem was, this boulder significantly passed their bench weight. Kaminari didn't have a quirk that helped him with physical labor. He himself had a quirk that helped him withstand weight, per se, but not lift weight. All his strength came from his well-earned muscles. That being said, those muscles were shit against this rock. Ideally, he'd smash the rock to pieces and move it out of the way, but if he did that, he'd risk harming the potential survivor. It doesn't matter whether it's a real person or not. He has to treat it as if it was. If he smashed it, a rock could easily launch itself through the diminished walls and hurt them. He couldn't take that risk. Eijiro reluctantly sighed and turned to Kaminari, his hand rubbing sheepishly at his neck. "I don't think either of us are going to be able to move this, Kaminari." "Then what are we going to do? There's a good chance this is the survivor." A light bulb went off in his head. "Wait a minute. Who's nearby? I could have sworn a pair went somewhere near us." Light poured into Kaminari's expression instantly. "Oh shit, you're right! I think it was Deku and Earphone Jack. Oh my god, Deku can lift the boulder, his quirk. Those black whip thingies, he can do it." They high-fived each other and made their way out of the basement. They were running toward where they had figured the pair was when footsteps caught both their ears. Abruptly, they turned to see Midoriya looking around at a building next to the place they were just in. It's like a miracle. Midoriya heard their footsteps and rushed to meet them. "Hey guys, me and Earphone Jack finished our area and we're looking around here. She mentioned that you two were over here too, so I figured we'd come join you. Did you guys find anything?" The freckled boy asked. There was a glint in his eyes that Eijiro couldn't quite understand, but it was gone just as soon as he'd seen it. Kaminari jumped to their problem, explaining what he'd seen and their idea to also try finding him. "Do you think that you could help us lift the boulder, dude?" A wide smile emerged on Midoriya's face as his eyes had closed happily, a thumbs up raised in the air. "Of course!" The three of them ran toward the building, and just before they walked inside, Eijiro asked the question that's been racking his brain since he saw Midoriya standing by himself. "Hey Deku, where's Earphone Jack?" Midoriya didn't falter, quickly saying, "She's doing a sweep in the building across from here. Do you want me to go get her?" The way he answered was so Midoriya-like, effortlessly helpful and always so willing to accommodate that Eijiro didn't feel it was right to question his statement, so he left it alone and walked into the house, down to the basement. Well, damn, you guys weren't kidding. This is a hefty rock. His shock was switched immediately to reassurance as he patted his sleeves. "But no worries, I got this." Eijiro, like Kaminari had said, expected Midoriya's black whips to come out of his knuckles and to lift the rock out of the doorway, but instead, Midoriya rubbed his palms together and squatted low to the ground. He felt the heat rush to his cheeks as the squat exposed Midoriya's ass. Mind you, Eijiro was no fool. He was fully content to admire Midoriya's physique. As Mina would say, the dude has a bubble butt that could shake the earth. He thought that was pretty accurate. The problem was that he was seeing this now of all times. He wasn't able to hide behind his classmates or calm his roaring blush with a splash of cold water. He turned his head slightly to the left to see Kaminari's reaction, and it seemed he too was suffering. They both watched intently, red blotches on their cheeks, as Izuku lifted the boulder with his bare hands and walked it over to the corner of the basement, and gods, isn't his pure strength just so manly? Eijiro thought that would be it, but no. As soon as Midori dropped the boulder onto the ground, his sleeves burst from pressure, exposing his goddamn biceps of all things. The speed in which they burst is the same in which Eijiro's face turned the same color as his hair. Eijiro and Kaminari looked at each other flustered, not too sure what to do now that their faces looked as positively red as his hero name. Meanwhile, Midori seemed like he had not a care in the world, casually rolling up his torn sleeves, grumbling about how someone named May needed to make him a new one. His green gaze met each of theirs, and Eijiro could have sworn he saw a smirk in his eyes, but as soon as it appeared again, it was gone. "Are you guys all right?" he asked, his tone so innocent it makes Eijiro fall deeper. They both nod, neither of them able to say words that aren't, "You're so hot," or some other dirty phrase. Midori simply shrugs at them. Oh gods, they flexed. His muscles flexed. And moves towards the newly cleared door. He goes to place his hands on the handle, but suddenly his demeanor changes. The air tenses around them as Midori peeks over his shoulder. There's a glimmer in his eyes from earlier again, and this time it doesn't disappear. Both he and Kaminari swallow desperately as the backs of their necks burn under his sharp gaze. Calloused hands dropped, and Midori's head leans back as he stares at them over his shoulder. "You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd say you guys are flustered right now." Eijiro finds himself taking a step back at the same time Kaminari does, and they collide into each other, standing shoulder to shoulder. He can feel the sweat on his brow increase as Midori turns fully to them, arms on full display as he crosses them over his chest. "You think I don't see the blushes in the locker room, or hear the whispers in the hallway? Well, I do. Let's just say it was a skill I picked up in middle school." His tone is cunning, deliberate even. It cuts through every thought in Eijiro's head, thoughts of escaping the magnetic gaze of Midoriya. Gone. Ripped to shreds. Realizing Midori is the traitor? Nope. Overtaken by that flirtatious quirk of his lips, and Eijiro can feel the shallow breaths he's taking. He can hear Kaminari doing the same thing, but no matter how hard they try to fight it, Midori's movements and uncharacteristic flirts stop them in their tracks. It's mesmerizing, the way he moves toward them. And neither he nor Kaminari can keep their eyes off him as he swings the capture tape around their connected shoulders. He stops right in front of them, barely a hair between them both before he whispers kindly in their ears. "Till next time, boys." The exhausted fumes from his pipes make the debris around fly further into the air, and he sneezes as a result. "Kero, are you okay, Ingenium-san?" Su-chan asks, and after 3 years of friendship, Tenya can now confidently call her by her first name. "Ah, yes, I am quite all right, Froppy-san. Thank you for asking." He practically shouts back at her. If this was supposed to be a stealth mission, then he probably would have ruined their chances. Luckily it's not. Tenya doesn't think it matters whether or not his teammates can hear where he is, given he assumes they all watched where each other went in order to cover more ground anyways. Besides, this way his teammates know to move elsewhere to look. It's been about 18 minutes since the buzzer went off, and they still haven't found anything, which is starting to worry him. If he was being honest, he only hoped one of his other teammates found something. Su-chan makes a sound and blurts out, "Who do you think the traitor is?" Tenya doesn't answer immediately because, truthfully, he doesn't have much data to go off of. The entire group was only with each other for less than 5 minutes, and all he got from that was that there was a sneaking suspicion that Yaoyorozu-san could be it. "I have my suspicions about Kureidi-san. She was rather persistent about the idea of going off all by ourselves." Sue nods her head along, seeming to agree with him. "Other than that, I have no evidence that the others could be it." He knows the rainy day hero next to him isn't the traitor. It would simply be counterintuitive to wait almost 20 minutes to start subduing any heroes. There's no way she'd be able to wait that long and then be able to take down at least 5 others. "I must admit I'm at a loss too, Kero." She looks over her shoulder as they take in the fallen restaurants around them. The destruction is quite thorough, Tenya thinks. "But I have a feeling it's Shoto-san. He didn't say anything during our initial gathering, which isn't unusual, but it was his body language that was off." He tilts his head in question to her as she elaborates. "Normally during team exercises he's by Deku-kun and seems relatively open to working in groups. That was different today, Kero. He was standing much further from him and was just staring at Deku. I couldn't really read his expression, but something about it was suspicious." Maybe it is Todoroki-kun." "That is certainly intuitive of you, Froppy. Perhaps it is him." Interestingly enough, both of their suspicions had created a pair. The sound of harsh pounding resounded in the air, and both of them turned to see Midoriya running toward them, waving one hand in the air excitedly. Tenya notices the human-shaped sack thrown over his shoulder. "It looks like Deku found the survivor already," he cheers. Midoriya catches up to them, giving one of his signature smiles, and it's then Tenya notices the ripped sleeves. Beneath his mask, he feels a light blush on the back of his neck. He's thankful the Ingenium costume covers him at this moment. Even though most people think he has a stick up his ass, sometimes Tenya can admit when his classmates are attractive. He may shout that it's unprofessional to comment on other people's physiques, or we are hero students, we can't afford to be distracted by them. It doesn't mean that he can't also partake in admiring his classmates. Unlike some of his, passionate peers, he refuses to acknowledge it out loud. He can always add in an objective standpoint, but he can't bear to go any further than that. So yes, Tenya sure does appreciate the toned triceps of his friend, but he will die before he admits that out loud. Beside him, Sue croaks, "Where's earphone jack, Kero?" A minute, almost imperceptible clench of Midoriya's cheeks. It's the same motion someone makes when they're trying to hold back their tongue. Tenya barely notices it, because before he knows it, Midoriya is speaking. "She's a couple of blocks southwest of us. We decided to part ways in order to find the rest of the teammates quicker and travel toward the finish line. See?" He pats his hand on the dummy's back. "We found it at the abandoned mall where we were started." There's nothing inherently suspicious about the statement, but there's something in Tenya's gut that tells him that something is wrong. He looks away from Midoriya's beaming smile and makes eye contact with Sue. Something's different. The look in her eye seems to say, at least he's not alone in his obscure feeling. When he looks at Midoriya again, he looks the same as he always does, bright smile, gleaming eyes, and open posture, but that feeling. He has nothing to base it off. What Midoriya said seems like the right plan. Tenya would have suggested the same thing to Sue if the roles were reversed. Plus, if Midoriya was the traitor, why would he bring along the survivor? Wouldn't he hide it from them? It doesn't make sense. The nagging feeling of trepidation won't leave him, but he has no reason to not trust Midoriya, so he walks closer to him. Drawn in, despite the feeling, he guesses Sue makes the same decision because she follows too. Midoriya does nothing out of the ordinary as they move to his side. "Earphone Jack is that way. I told her we'd meet up with her once I found you guys." He holds the dummy steadily on his shoulder and gets a running position ready. "Are you ready?" A second of hesitation comes from both him and Sue, but before they know it, they're following Midoriya. His friend keeps up an enthusiastic chatter as they run, but Tenya isn't listening. He should have been listening. "Ingenium-san, you're actually really attractive, you know." His engines sputter, which makes him collide with the ashy floor. He barely was able to throw his hands out in front of him before his face hit the ground. "Deku-kun, why would you say—" Sue's voice carries into the air as Midoriya's black whip traps her in its embrace, covering her mouth along the way. Meanwhile, Tenya's on the floor, grappling with what just happened, shock evident behind his mask. Midoriya is walking toward him, the survivor tossed aside somewhere. Something about it is just so un-Midoriya-like that it makes Tenya shudder, because the way his friend is walking right now reflects a confidence that Tenya has never seen on the boy. So much so that his face is bead red, and again he's thanking the gods that he's got a mask on. But it seems he thanked them too soon. In one swift motion, Midoriya kicks the mask off him, and now he can fully see the dark glamour in his eyes. He's too entranced by them to notice Sue struggling above. The way they glint with devilry, but still somehow show his own kind of spark, is so much that Tenya doesn't even comprehend the words he's muttering. "Deku, what is the matter with you?" A sly smile curls onto his lips, and suddenly Midoriya is grabbing Tenya's hands, helping him up. "Need I say it again? You're hot, Ida-san." God's the way he says it makes another shudder come from him. He is being completely honest, too. Tenya can tell, and that makes it so much worse. "Hot," he echoes. Sure, he's heard people tell him that he's attractive, and his jawline could cut glass. Not his words, but you get the point. Those compliments are nothing, however, compared to the way that they sound coming out of this new Midoriya. Midoriya leans into him, squeezes his hand, which is still being held. His dark eyes pour into Tenya's as he mutters, "Should have gone with your gut, Ida-kun." When Midoriya nonchalantly complimented Ida-kun's looks, she knew they were doomed. Even though she's known for her quick reflexes, she hadn't been fast enough to beat the speed of his black whips as they plunged her into the sky. The moment that she tried to release her tongue, they covered her mouth. Suyu regrets not listening to her instincts. She should have known as soon as Midoriya showed up alone that he was the traitor. It had been the whole point of the pairs. Even Ochaku-kun pointed it out, but all her reasoning went out the window when she saw the dummy on his shoulder. If Midoriya was the traitor, why would he bring the survivor? Why risk it? That had been her thought process, so she ignored the gut feeling. She trusted herself to act quick enough to counter it if she was wrong. Apparently that self-confidence was lost on her as she was thrust into the air. But if she was going to talk about lost self-confidence, then looking at Midoriya made her realize where it had gone. Even up in the air, she could see the swagger that exuded off of him. It was like a calm before the storm type of aura, but the thing was, they were already in the storm. She'd been trapped, and she could already tell that Iida-kun was lost to the winds. She could obviously see the roaring blush on his exposed face, and that meant Midoriya could easily overtake him. He had caught them off guard, in such a way that startled both of them. Midoriya has never been the type to blurt out flirts or talk in such a seductive way. Hell, even the way he moved carried out that technique. It was so startlingly different from his stammering and flushed expressions that it kicked the wind out of her. Maybe that's why Todoroki-kun was staring so intently at him. Could he have sensed something from the start? But it went deeper than that. Something must have happened last night to change him so drastically. With the way he's moving, Tsuyu can only imagine one teacher that would be able to teach him that. She's still trying to inch out of the black whips when they suddenly start moving her closer to the ground. Her eyes track the movement below. Midoriya is leaning close to Iida, and Tsuyu is begging him to do something. It's a lost cause, though, because as soon as she wishes for it, Iida is being pushed to the ground like a plank. He's shocked still, probably shell-shocked, on the ground as Midoriya ties him up in tape. At this point, Tsuyu is sure of two things. Jiro-san and Iida-san are out of play, and she's next. The dark green gaze of Midoriya traces Tsuyu up and down before landing on her eyes, more magnetic than she's ever seen. She's not surprised to feel the heat on her cheeks with the way that he's looking at her. It's just so different from his usual soft gaze, but at the same time it's so similar. He still has the kindness in them front and center, but behind them is something more alluring, like he's begging her to fall. Into his arms? Into failure? She can't find herself to care. All she knows is that she's starting to lose her senses. She's brought closer to him and placed in his arms, rather exposed and sweaty arms, she might add. She still has enough control of herself to think. Once he lets her out a black whip, she'll trap him with her tongue and fling him far out of reach. That should work, and then I can go warn the others. One problem. She's still wrapped in the quirk, and Midoriya hasn't let the quirk fall despite her being in his capable and so strong arms. You were the one I had to think about the most, Sue. The way he says her name is like music to her ears. I got lucky. You being paired with Iida gave me the best way to trap you. Both of you think well with your heads, so when one of you doesn't hesitate, the other will do the same. His explanation falls smoothly out of his lips, and Tsuyu can't help but lose more of herself. He's absolutely right. When Iida didn't question Midoriya aloud, she decided not to either. She figured her instinct might have been wrong if one of her most logical friends thought otherwise. But don't blame yourself, Sue. You're still one of the smartest girls I know. The flattery mixed with his sultry voice was what made her senses drop once more. She thought this was it. He was going to tie her up and leave her to fool more of their teammates, but gods, how she was wrong. Because Midoriya did one last thing before he pulled out the tape. The freckled-faced boy with the dark eyes had leaned his face forward and kissed her on the forehead. It was nothing more than a peck, but Tsuyu found herself a goner, her senses completely gone, and her mind was 1,000 miles deep in bafflement. She barely felt the tape being wrapped around her body, but she did feel the soft touch of Midoriya's hands as he gently sat her down next to a still shocked Iida. Tsuyu watched as he picked up the dummy before sprinting away. Shoto was an idiot. He had thought the ice structure would hold up against the falling building. It was the last building he and Yaoyorozu-san had to look for in order to clear their area. But the ice wasn't enough. He had thought it was all right, but in hindsight he was too distracted to realize that the ice against stone was a losing battle. And now Yaoyorozu was trapped in between a rock and a hard place, literally. Since the building was slowly collapsing, they decided Shoto would create ice beams to hold it up. Once he'd done that, Yaoyorozu intended to create some sort of device that could cut holes in the wall without damaging the structure. They couldn't afford to just punch the walls, because if the survivor was in here, and the ice structures broke as a result, then large pieces of the foundation could crush them all. They had to play it safe. Bunch of bullshit that turned out to be. He had hastily thrown up the beams because he was itching to find where Midoriya was. Ever since he stepped foot into that cityscape, something had been bothering him. He realized that it was Midoriya himself as soon as he had locked eyes with the boy. Something about him was off, and Shoto couldn't pinpoint it. No matter how much he had stared at his friend, nothing distinct jumped out, so he kept quiet about it. Let the feeling fester, and now it led him to this point. His ice had broken just as Yaoyorozu was examining the wall. He tried to get to her before a giant piece of the ceiling separated them, but he didn't make it in time. He thought maybe Yaoyorozu could create something to get herself out, but all her exposed skin was too close to either wall or the fallen piece. She was trapped and had no room to create something, and it was all his fault. If he hadn't been so distracted by Midoriya, then this probably wouldn't have happened. He could barely even hear Yaoyorozu. The debris around her had muffled her voice to the point where he could hardly make out full words. Shoto tried moving the fallen rocks, but it was no use. They wouldn't budge. He may be strong, but he wasn't that strong. He could hear her saying. Shoto thinks that it roughly translates to go find help, so he listens. His steps pound against the trash-filled streets as he runs in the direction he saw Uraraka go. He last saw her and Bakugo running northwest of his own location. She'd be able to move the rock safely without damaging anything, so he had to go get her and fast. He didn't know how many people were out of commission with the traitor, so it didn't also help that it was already 25 minutes into the simulation and no one had come to find them, with the survivor in hand. He jumps over a damaged bench when green lightning had flashed from the corner of his eye. Midori's by his side instantly, and he's holding the survivor, much to Shoto's surprise. He stops running and Midori screeches to a stop. Absently, Shoto takes in his new companion's appearance. He seems to have lost his sleeves, and his eyes have taken a wild glee within them. It's on par with hero student Deku, so Shoto ignores it. What he can't ignore is the heat blooming on his neck at Midori's exposed muscles. He activates his right side in order to stop it from growing, and he can't be getting flustered over Midori's looks again. The last time that happened during a training exercise, he had trapped Ida-san in a glacier. "Midoriya, where's your partner?" he asked bluntly. That feeling that he's had swirling in his stomach comes back to fruition. Whether or not Midoriya has the survivor doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that he's alone, 25 minutes into the exercise. Actually, make that 26 minutes. Holding the survivor on his shoulder, with one hand, his companion points with his thumb on the other in the direction of where Shoto last saw Ida and Sue. "Earphone Jack is helping Froppy carry Ingenium-san over here. From what they told me, a piece of furniture fell on his calf when he was searching one of the two-storied restaurants." Midori pauses for a second before he waves his free hand erratically in front of him. "But he's okay. The exhaust on his calf will be fine after a quick visit with Recovery Girl." Shoto watches as he glances around him, looking for something. "Actually, where's Kriedi-san? I'm thinking that she could wrap up the injury before it gets infected." The way he says it is sincere. In fact, everything he said makes complete sense. It would make sense to leave Jiro and Sue behind to help carry Ida so Midori can sprint to find the others. He's naturally quick, and with their dwindling time limit, it makes sense. It's something about the way it came out of Midori's mouth doesn't sound right, so Shoto can't really explain why he thinks that, but it's what that gut feeling suggests. "Shoto-kun." Even though that's his hero name, it still makes him bristle when Midori says his first name. He always says it with such care. His right side fights to cool the blush as he finally responds to his question. "She's trapped in a tight space. I need to find her gravity to get her out." "Oh my, okay, why don't you show me where it is and I can help since I'm here?" Shoto raises an eyebrow at him. There's nothing wrong with his proposition, but Midori seems a little too eager to figure out where Yaoyorozu is. The feeling in his stomach twists. "She's a couple of buildings down from where we are." All right, let's go then." The freckled boy turns ready to run, but before he can, Shoto grabs his wrist. Midori seems to bristle at his touch, but Shoto keeps his grip firm on him. "What's wrong, Shoto-kun?" He stares hard into green eyes, trying to understand what his gut is telling him. The boy's eyes reveal nothing but muddled confusion. His freckled cheeks are pinkened, which confuses Shoto even more. What the fuck is going on? "You're asking what's wrong with me when I should be asking what's wrong with you, Midoriya." Midori's face goes red as Shoto stares shamelessly at him. He lowers his face and Shoto can't see his expression anymore, behind the dark green curls. Suddenly the atmosphere around them drops, the air becomes thicker. Shoto finds himself instinctively gripping Midori's wrist harder. Darkened eyes peer up at him, and it's like someone went inside him and stole his oxygen. He can't even fight the flush of his cheeks. Midori's eyes have narrowed to slits, as if he's looking at Shoto like he wants to do unspeakable things. Whatever that implies, Shoto doesn't care to find out. All he knows is that that glint in Midori's eyes screams danger, and he needs to create a distance. He throws up an ice wall instantly between them, but he's off his game. It comes out small. Ideally, he wants to use his fire, but he doesn't trust himself with it at the moment when Midori is staring at him like that. Ever the gymnast since second year, Midori springs away from it. To Shoto's bewilderment, he uses it as a launching board to shoot himself at Shoto. He lets loose ice wall after ice wall, but Midori keeps avoiding them. Hell, he even smashed through one. Eventually he gets the jump on Shoto and barrels legs first into him. When Shoto opens his eyes after the collision, he's starting to wish he understood what his gut was saying earlier, because Midori is the traitor, and he was sitting tightly in Shoto's lap. It takes everything in him to not let his fire run wild, even though this exact situation has happened so many times before when they trained together. He could never break the habit of combusting into smoke whenever Midori had him like this. Unlike now, those times Midori was just as awkward as him, muttering apologies and rushing to get off. But this Midori is nothing like that one. This Midori is practically cozying up on Shoto. Everything about this situation seems deliberate. The sly curl of his lips, the darkened expression, the quite literal glow of his eyes, the way he doesn't seem flustered at all, though his cheeks are red, Shoto notes. Everything about him points to the sort of planning only Midori would obsess over, and all of this seems especially catered to him. He swallows a shaky breath as he fights to buck Midori off of him. The boy is heavy enough, though, despite his size, and Shoto is currently not at his max strength, seeing that he's trying his best to not get too distracted. A smirk gathers on Midori's face, and the freckled boy leans down, placing his hands on the sides of his head. Oh, come on, please just spare me at this point. He gets so close to Shoto that he can practically feel the hot breath coming out of him. It's absolute torture. Green eyes shine with mischief as they stare into his blue and gray ones. Shoto can't help swallowing. Gods, why does he have to be so close? Just so you know, Shoto, I've dreamed about doing this before. If that wasn't enough to make him blow up in flames, then Midori's next words were, It's a shame I'm on a time limit, don't you think? He was teasing him. He was flirting with him. The Midori he knows couldn't utter a single cheesy pickup line without stuttering, but this mysterious boy in his lap, who looks exactly like Midori and has all of Midori's quirks, clearly can. The boy practically pouts at their lack of time, and that's enough. His left side goes up in flames right as Midori flies off his lap. Within seconds he's got them under control again, but he's too late. The brazen boy that was just flirting with him is now wrapping his form with tape, and Shoto is helpless to stop him. As he grabs the dummy, he walks back over to Shoto. Even though his mind is consumed by what Midori was implying, he can, as clear as day, see the way Midori's hips swing, the way his pants hug his thighs with the motion, sparks leave his right side. The final blow. Midori leaning over him and whispering, We'll have so much more time later, though, right, Shoto? Gods, this is awful, Momo mutters in her trapped space. She sent Todoroki-kun to get help about 8 minutes ago, at least. She thinks it was that long. She's totally not counting the seconds down her head. Of course not. Regardless, he still hasn't come back. It's starting to worry her. It's now past the 30-minute mark, and they haven't found the survivor. She's holding out hope that one of her teammates has found it in their area, since clearly she and Todoroki-kun have found nothing. She's almost certain that this building doesn't hold the survivor, but they had to check. It was their duty, as good heroes, to check everywhere. To be honest, she kind of regrets the decision to follow said duty, because here she is, stuck between a falling ceiling and a wall. What would I do for a cup of tea right now? Her ears perk up at the sound of someone panting in the building. Shoto-san, is that you? The person in the building doesn't make any response back. Maybe they just can't hear her. It's possible the sheer amount of stone around her is canceling out her voice, yet at the same time Todoroki-kun could hear enough to leave, so that at the very least means that people on the other side can hear muffles. So why isn't this person saying anything? Momo is certain this isn't her partner now. Todoroki-kun, despite his introvertedness, would still grace her with a response in this situation, especially in this situation. That's when it smacks her in the head. The traitor. And Momo, she can do nothing to prepare herself for them. All she can do is listen as the person rummages around the building doing God knows what. It sounds like they're trying to find something. Momo can't imagine what. Perhaps if she hadn't called out, the person would have been searching for her, but since she made her presence known, she knew that they knew where she was. The sounds of rapidly moving footsteps trace back and forth, growing closer and then further from her. Heavy breathing follows the movements. It's like they're moving something. Again the thought hits her smack dab in the face as she realizes what that could imply. She can only assume, but the giant boulder in front of her probably wasn't the only thing that had fallen, and they're most likely moving more rocks in front of her so that she can't see. The person isn't searching for something. They're moving rocks out of the way. The person was most likely also securing the structure of the building. They're trying to get her out of here, she thinks. She should be happy that she'll finally get out, but her breath quickens, because the person getting her out is the traitor, and they aren't doing this for her benefit. They're doing this to win. Frantically, her eyes map out the cramped space as if she hasn't been doing that for the last 10 minutes. God damn it. There's no room for her to create anything. Her arms are locked at her sides, and she can barely rock back and forth in the space. Momo's only hope is to recover as quickly as possible once she's free. Then she can worry about how to fight the traitor. The boulder in front of her rumbles, and Momo steadies herself against the opposite wall. It pulses again, and instantly a big crack forms in front of her eyes. She braces herself just before the crack scatters into a cacophony of them and explodes. Her eyes squeeze shut at the impact of a few resulting rocks. She feels the debris grazing her skin, but she can't wallow in it. Wiping her eyes, she peers at the sheer chaos the area is in. Rocks are everywhere, and the dust is yet to settle. Momo gets herself into a defensive position, staring wildly around for the traitor, but there's no one here. How is that possible? There's no way they could have left so soon. Something in the atmosphere makes her tense. It's making her feel the kind of trepidation you feel when you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. She frantically is looking around for anything, anyone, but there's nothing in her vision. Hello? She feels it before she sees it, the slithering of something on her hand, tickling her fingers. Her breath leaves her lungs, and her eyes slowly travel to her hand. Wrapped around it is a black energy creating a vine that goes up and up and up until she sees him. Midori's looking down at her from his position directly above her, seated in the hole of the ceiling. He's grinning from ear to ear, his eyes dark with something Momo has never seen on him, something almost charming. She watches slowly, frozen in her spot, as he lifts the finger of the knuckle that exudes the black whip and circles it around and around. And just like his finger, she spins in circles. Her feet twirl around with her body, one and the same, until she dips toward the ground. She expects to fall. She's lost her balance, but a warm hand grabs the square of her back, and another finds her hand, the exact hand that was once held by pure energy. Sorry it took me so long to rescue you, Yaoyorozu-san. His eyes glisten when he speaks. You deserve much better. So much better. Maybe it's their position, the fact that she's wrapped in his arms as if they just danced in a ballroom, or maybe it's his words, the way he says them so genuinely, so kindly, as if he's not betraying her and the team right now, as if all he cares about is her, that despite the fact that this is a hero training exercise, he said her actual name. Maybe it's the memory of this exact situation happening in so many of her romance novels. She doesn't know, but she finds herself swooning, captured by whatever Midoriya-kun is doing. The freckled classmate that she's never known to be so bold and charming drops her hand and reaches for her face. She feels his fingers, rough yet so caring, rub at the debris on her cheeks. She doesn't even care that she can feel her face turning as red as a tomato. She's too far in to be on the defensive now. Midoriya is treating her like all the women are treated in her books, and she can't help the way that she feels at the moment. Damn this training exercise, she thinks. Let her have something small for once. She didn't even realize that when she was twirling, Tape was twirling with her. Oi, Aravity, I found them! Bakugo yells across the street, standing just barely outside the door. Coming! Ochako sprints over quickly, carefully avoiding the thrown foundations on the floor. She notices the irritated growl on Bakugo's face as they walk in, and now she can see why. In the building, tied up on the floor by some sort of white tape, are Kirishima and Kaminari. If Ochako had to describe the expressions on their faces, she'd say sheepish at first glance. At another, she'd say there's a mix of embarrassment, fluster, and definitely shock. Their cheeks are dulled red, and their eyes are shifty. What the hell happened to them? What the fuck happened to you idiots? Her partner voices her thoughts with much more frustration. Kaminari and Kirishima look at each other, a conversation happening between their eyes. Then Kaminari, with a lopsided smile, looks at both of them and shakes his head. We can't tell you. Wait, why? She asks. Against the rules, Kirishima says meekly, shrugging his shoulders. God damn it, the fucking nerd did this. He waves his gloved finger up and down at them. Didn't he? Their side glances at each other is all Ochako and Bakugo need to confirm what Bakugo had told her nearly 5 minutes ago. They'd just finished sweeping their area for their survivor. After 20 minutes of searching, Ochako remembers cursing at the amount of space that they had to cover. Thank gods they'd all split up, that she had thought. As soon as they had finished, Bakugo ran over to her and yelled that they had to find the others, or rather, we're finding fucking Deku now. Wait, hold up! But Ochako had to run to catch up to him, as Bakugo had immediately started darting in the opposite direction. Dynamite, what are you talking about? Why are we finding Deku? Where are we going? She had shouted next to him. That's not my fucking name, Pink Cheeks. She had almost definitely rolled her eyes at that. And she was not about to say his long-ass hero name while running. Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite didn't exactly roll off the tongue. The boy beside her still refuses to officially change his hero name, no matter how many times they try to convince him. The nerd's the traitor. I know it. What? Deku-kun? There's no way. We all know he can't lie. She had explained, and Bakugo wasn't listening. Ochako kept following him until he had stopped in the area that they were in now. Do you think this is where he is? He ignored her, so she had decided to just hear him out. Bakugo usually had a sixth sense for this type of stuff, and Ochako trusted him, even if the thought of Deku being a traitor was unnerving and to her unrealistic. No, this is where I'm pretty sure Shitty Hair and Dunce went to. Not even 3 minutes ago, Bakugo had explained that Deku was west of these two, and if his theory was right, he would have subdued these two after dealing with Jiro. Now at the half-hour mark, Ochako is proof that Deku is the traitor, and in all honesty, she feels really dumb for not being able to tell. She's known Deku for 3 years now, and yet she couldn't tell that he was hiding something. But to be fair, Deku is a horrible liar, and perhaps she was blindsided by that bias. Moreover, Deku had been acting normal in the beginning. How the heck could Bakugo tell? Has Deku always been good at lying? Or did something change recently to help him with it? Ochako hopes it's the second one, because the first one would hurt a little more than she cared to admit. Bakugo sprinted again, this time heading south. She realizes why now. They're moving in a circle, which is probably the fastest way to accomplish Deku's mission. That was what Bakugo's theory was. What she still didn't know is why he decided now to search for Deku. They only had 15 minutes left, and they still had no survivor, and probably only had a few teammates left. She was about to ask him, but the sound of low murmurs caught her ear. Ida and Suchan were in the distance, sitting on the floor with tape around them, chatting about something that has their cheeks both red. What is it with the red cheeks on all of them? She intended to stop, but Bakugo had reared around them and kept running. She followed him, but her mind was crunching the numbers. They needed 5 people and the survivor to win. Jiro, Kirishima, Kaminari, Sue, and Ida were out as far as she knows. That means that she and Bakugo, Yaomomo, and Todoroki were left. That only made 4. Whether they found Deku or not, they couldn't win. They'd already lost, and they didn't even have their survivor. Shame curled in her stomach. In the haste of finding the survivor, she had admittedly forgotten the traitor. Her mind did that sometimes, focusing on only one goal when she was distracted, and she had been distracted. But none other than the traitor himself, Deku, had been on her mind. Even after 3 years, she still had a crush on the boy. Well, actually, she had crushes on multiple people. Okay, not exactly crushes, but, interests. At this point, she was just pining for some affection and would happily accept it from numerous people. Anyways, these past few days, that locked box in her head where she keeps all the little things she loves about Deku started to finally overfill, to the extent that she couldn't help but share it with the other girls. They had spent the last few nights pining over girls and boys alike. All that had been distracting her, and she finally was reaping the consequences. She winces slightly as her foot knocks against the brick on the floor, but she continues chasing after Bakugo, regardless of whether or not they actually lost already. She knows he wouldn't give up. She had no doubt her partner already figured out the loss, and yet he chose to stick it out till the end. That was Bakugo for you, determined as ever. Even though they've technically lost, she would do the same. She's a hero after all, and she's not backing down. "Found Icy Hot!" he shouted from behind a building. Ochako could just barely see him, but his voice was loud and clear. She heard his running footsteps and indicated that he was off again in the direction of the circle. She went to follow. She figured that Deku, after taking care of Yaomomo and Todoroki, was looking for her and Bakugo where they originally were. "I guess we'll meet him there." She paused. "Wait a minute, where's Yaomomo?" She ran toward Todoroki because, according to the pattern, all partners were found with each other, so it only made sense for them to be the same, but as she stepped closer, something pulls her leg out from under her. She manages to shield her face before her body slams into the ground. She looks wide-eyed at Todoroki, but the guy doesn't say anything, though his face is freshly red. His eyes, on the other hand, glance behind her, subtle just like always. Deku's here. She tries to stand, but whatever had tripped her is wrapped around her ankle and starting to drag her. Opening her mouth, she tries to yell, but something covers it. She knows it's Deku's black whip, so she can't peel it off. To save her a couple of bruises, she taps her shoulder and lets the gravity disappear. What she thought was a normal speed turned out to be much faster without the gravity. She zips through the air toward the unknown. Ochako truly doesn't know what to expect anymore. Something has changed, and it's substantial if Deku took out all these people in 30 minutes. But she can handle it. She's Uraraka Ochako. She's beaten Deku with his multiple quirks in training matches before. She can surely do it here. She lands harshly against a brick wall inside a building, but recovers quickly. Brown eyes take in the atmosphere. She's in what looks like a living room, purple smoke curling around the edges. He's using a smoke screen. She dashes to any rubble in the area, floating objects left and right as fast as she can. As she's pressing her fingers against a couch, Deku's figure comes into view. She gets ready to move, to press her 5-finger pads onto him, but that's when it hits her. A wave of unspoken tension. Her eyes don't meet Deku's. She still can't see him, but she can sure as hell see his body's outline. That change she thought of earlier, the one that explains how Deku had managed to subdue 7 people without creating any relative noise, she sees it now in the way he moves, the way he's gracefully walking, which makes it even more magnetizing. It's so vastly different from how he usually walks when he's in costume. The hero Deku walks with open friendliness, walks in a way that ensures safety within his powerful grasp, but this Deku walks so flirtatiously that it throws Otaku's mind in a loop. Because Deku has never flirted without getting embarrassed. has never been able to do it confidently, has never been able to say a pickup line without, was that too much? Following. And he is the type of guy who has a god's body yet doesn't seem to know it, or at least doesn't consider it. Ochako has even heard the guy complain about how plain he is. Yet here he is, flaunting it in such a way that makes Ochako's already pink cheeks turn pinker. I think I figured out why everyone's faces were red. Despite herself, she stares dumbly at him, and before she knows it, Black Whip grabs both of her arms and slams her gently against a wall. She struggles against the hold. It's honestly really tight around her wrists, not tight enough to leave a mark, but enough to hurt when she moves. Deku comes into full view, and Ochako's eyes immediately land on his exposed arms, the sleeves ripped off, showing the muscles her and her friends have swooned over. There's no bruises on him, not so much as a scrape. No one actually fought him, and she knows why once her eyes trace their way to his face. It's so different. His kind smile is pulled into a smirk, a seductive smirk, dare she say. His freckles practically pop out if that's even possible, and his eyes, oh gods, his eyes. She's always loved the kindness in them, the caring look and pure gratitude that he shows through them. The way they look now? She can't help the redness of her face. His eyes are a deep abyss of affection and confidence in something so undeniably attractive that she can't look away. It's like they're trapping her and it's working. Whatever he did to get this confidence, to get him past the stuttering and flustered mess, did wonders. She feels a little grateful for it because Deku is acting out of fantasy. A once-thought impossible fantasy, Ochako only talks about and whispers to the girls. He leans over her and doesn't say anything. He doesn't even need to. Ochako is stuck as she's too deep into the fantasy to care. That locked box is overfilled and it's only spilling even more. Deku's face is in front of her, shining eyes on hers, and she doesn't know how much she can take before actually passing out from bliss. Turns out not much. Before she sees it coming, Midori Izuku kisses her softly on the cheek as his fingers wrap tape around her hands. And what does she say in response? I think I might actually die from this. The moment Ponytail suggested her idea to the group, he knew it. From the way the nerd's stance had shifted, how he practically exuded excitement, how the light behind his eyes shifted towards something even Katsuki couldn't wholly recognize. It was so subtle that only someone who's known the guy for his entire life would pick up on it. He knew Deku was the traitor just like that. Katsuki wanted to get it over with right there, pummel the guy for even thinking he could defeat them at all, secure the victory against his longtime rival, and move on to the next task. But that was a fool's plan. Katsuki was no goddamn fool. If he'd called him out, Deku would have launched an attack immediately. He knew the nerd wouldn't even try to convince them. There would have been no point, because everyone knew how well Katsuki could read his childhood friend. They would have followed his lead. That would have led to a full-on battle, and he knew Deku had enough endurance to drag the fight out as long as he could. The guy's pain tolerance was off the charts, and just pure determination takes him further than most. It was something that he envied from the guy, his pain tolerance, not his determination. Katsuki had that just as much as the damn nerd, but the pain tolerance, partly his fault he knows, is enviable in heroics. Yeah, Katsuki had it, but even he couldn't withstand running around with broken limbs every time he used his quirk. Deku was a fucking lunatic for being able to do that for half of their first year. Regardless, if a full-on battle occurred, it would have taken at least half an hour to defeat him. Katsuki was sure of that, especially with the extras he had on his side. Yet that was still too long. They only had 45 minutes. Would have never been able to find the survivor, and actually win, in this giant fucking city with newly added rebel on top, already destroyed area. Even though they might have defeated the traitor, that was still only half a win. And fuck that. Katsuki didn't do half wins. When the damn traitor suggested that they split into pairs and search, he had frustratedly agreed and accepted. It was the best-case scenario for winning the entire exercise. He trusted his teammates to be able to cause some damage to the nerd, wear him out so that when the guy finally comes to fight him, because he knew he'd be the last one on the list, he'd have an upper hand. Plus, he figured one of them would have been able to find the survivor, if he hadn't, and at least get to safety before being taken out. They needed 5 people to win. He and Pink Cheeks and 3 others had to survive. With the time constraint, Deku wouldn't have been able to take out more than 4 if he went in the order Katsuki thought he would. By the time he would have taken out the 4th, Katsuki would be done and ready to pummel him. That was what he had assumed would happen. It made the most sense. He only surrounds himself with the best, and he knew they could hold out. He had rushed Pink Cheeks and himself to search their area as quickly as they could, but they barely finished at the 20-minute mark. It had taken them 15 minutes, and Katsuki's anger was causing sparks. He still hadn't heard anything, not an explosion from one of Ponytail's cannons, no sounds of falling foundations. He hadn't seen ice shooting through the air, nothing was happening, and he was getting pissed the fuck off. Why hadn't his teammates fought back? Why wasn't there any noise or a sight of a fight? He didn't have a fucking clue, and any sort of explanation he conjured up didn't align with the way that Deku fought. Kotsky had rushed Round Cheeks with him to find Shitty Hair and Sparky because they were the closest and maybe they could fucking tell him what happened, but when he saw them all fucking flustered and embarrassed on the floor, he got no answers. All he knew was that they had no scratches on them, there were no remnants of a fight. Whatever the fuck Deku had done to them was different than his usual technique, and that pissed off Kotsky more. His frustration was through the roof, and he was seething as he and Round Cheeks had followed where Deku would have gone. By the time he reached Icy Hot, he knew that only he and Pink Cheeks were left. He didn't even need to find Ponytail to confirm it. They'd officially lost before the timer ran out, and he loathed that. His eyes roared with anger as he booked it to where he knew Deku was. If he was going to lose, then he was going to lose at the very least with the traitor pinned in his grasp. The dim sound of pounding footsteps far behind him suddenly disappeared. He almost didn't hear it amongst his racing heart and explosions. From his spot in the sky, he landed on the ground and booked it to where he thought Pink Cheeks might have stopped at, and it was less than a mile behind him. Which, what the fuck? He could have sworn that she was closer. Icy Hot was still there, sitting up against a wall, just staring at him. Kotsky growled, and when the guy didn't say anything, he yelled, "Which way did she fucking go?" The living Peppermint just shrugged, but Kotsky caught his eyes darting quickly to the right. He bolted on the ground. If he used his explosions, he might not hear something that could give her position away. His red eyes trailed the buildings by him, looking up and down, around, everywhere to spot even the slightest shake of something. He didn't have time to search inside every building, so he was counting on Pink Cheeks to create a damn commotion. To his right, a whoosh had flew through the air, and he saw the green lightning in the sky, and he launched an explosion to meet him. Right arm raised to swing, and a manic grin on his face. "Deku!" Kotsky yelled right as his fist made contact with a block of arms. It shot the nerd back a couple of feet, and he aimed another explosion at Green. As he looks at his rival in front of him, that strange glint in his green eyes looks back, and he shoots the explosion, but before it reaches Deku, Kotsky catches him winking and blowing a kiss right at him as he zips down diagonally. Red eyes widen in pure shock, and his body moves on instinct, chasing after Deku. The boy landed sharply on a nearby roof, his black whip swirling back into his knuckles. Kotsky's mind is still whirling with unadulterated confusion when he and Deku fight hand to hand. What the absolute fuck was that? The nerd doesn't blow kisses and wink in the middle of a brawl, especially one with Kotsky. Deku's fist collides with his solar plexus, and he lets out a groan of pain. He returns with a sweep of his rival's legs, resulting in the nerd bending backwards and away from Kotsky. In the tiniest pause before Deku comes flying toward him, Kotsky checks the time on his wrist. 7 minutes left. He can do that. But just as he says that, Deku's flying body shoots past him, boosted by Fajin, and he could have sworn the boy was smirking at him. His hands burst with explosions, trying to get him to Deku, who floats in the sky. He's almost there when Black Whip shoots toward him. Dodging left, he avoids them as they fly past, but amidst the action he didn't notice a lone whip that was traveling behind him. It grips his midriff and launches him toward the ground. He breaks his fall with an explosion and tumbles roughly before the buzzing leaves his ear. Deku's in front of him, blowing another fucking kiss at him just as he lands a punch on Kotsky's sternum. The breath is knocked out of him. As he throws an explosion up, Deku dodges it and creates distance. Kotsky's at his wit's end, trying to figure out what the fuck Deku's doing. It's boiling his blood the way that the guy is blowing kisses at him as if they aren't brawling. He's got on that attractive smirk and his eyes are glinting with fucking mischief of all things. It's making him angrier and angrier and he just wants to... Wait a fucking minute. Did he just... His blood runs cold. Deku is circling him in the air, not making him move toward him. Attractive. Did I just fucking think that now of all times? His face explodes in red, and that's his final straw. Gritting his teeth, he flies through the air and pulls the pin on his grenade equipment. He launches the sweat-filled thing at Deku just in time for it to hit him, an explosion cracking through the atmosphere. "This is what you get, you fucking nerd! Is this a joke to you?" He's practically foaming at the mouth, with how furious he is. His face turns the same shade as his eyes, from both the anger and that stupid fucking thought that keeps slithering in his head. Deku? Attractive? No fucking way. Sure, Kotsky admires the fucking nerd, so much as he spent half his life chasing after him, but that doesn't mean anything. So what if he purposely picks Deku to train with him when he could have anyone? That's not anything either. Kotsky just knows Deku's the only one who will challenge him the way he likes. He likes how they go all out on each other. So what if he catches himself looking at Deku's physique a few times? He's just sizing him up, as competition. He's not about to let the nerd surpass him. None of that fucking matters, because Bakugo Kotsky isn't going to get caught in whatever fucking web Deku's spinning. He's not red from a furious blush, and he's definitely not thinking about the suggestive gleam that Deku had been looking at him with. The dust clears and Kotsky hurtles toward his rival's dropping body, ready to throw him 6 feet under. He's not fucking dead yet. No way in hell he wouldn't have survived that blast. The shifty bastard. He's right. Deku's hands clench and black whips releasing to grab a hold of the nearby buildings. Not on my fucking watch. Katsuki's sweat ignites faster with the sheer amount of it. Totally just because he's fighting, not for any other reason. Definitely not for another reason. He blasts explosion after explosion, a quick succession of them toward Deku. From his view, they seem to hit his mark. The black whips disappear and Deku hurtles down quicker toward the ground. He glides through the sky to meet the guy, grabbing his filling arm, and those fucking alluring eyes are squeezed shut from what Katsuki assumes is pain, judging by the burns on his exposed arms. Nothing that'll scar with Recovery Girl around, though, thank God. His mind still whirls with thoughts that he'd rather keep denying when he throws Deku onto the ground right before they land. He knows the throw isn't going to kill him, or even fuck with his bones due to how fucking resilient they are after everything. He lands with a loud thud that echoes through the area, and Katsuki jumps on top of him, pinning him to the ground with all his strength, because if he didn't, there's no doubt in his mind that Deku would launch another attack through his pain. "You thought you could beat me again, Deku?" He taunts, even though his face is still holding the maddening blush. "Well, fucking look who lost now." He completely dismisses the fact that in the large scheme of things, he's lost. He doesn't quite care about that anymore, now that he has subdued the traitor. Damn nerd. Green eyes open slowly, squinting. His only warning was the shiver that ran down his body at those eyes. Deku headbutts him, and as Katsuki's grip loosens by reaction, he flips them over so quickly that Katsuki's head bangs on the floor. Blurrily, Deku sits on top of him. He's managed to move and hold down both of Katsuki's hands above his head, nails digging into his gloved wrists. He can feel Deku's other arm pressing on his throat now, holding his head down while his body does the rest of the work. His fucking pain tolerance, how the fuck did I overlook that? "Oh, Kacchan, you really thought that you got me, didn't you?" And the way he says it, the way he's teasing him with a cunning smirk on his face, the way his emerald eyes glow with triumph and enticement, their position, it all lights a dangerous fire in Katsuki's stomach. "That's cute," he taunts. "Let's try this again another time. I do love our training sessions together, after all," he says, dragging out the word love. The 45-minute time clock buzzes throughout the city. Midoriya stands proudly, hands on his hips in front of Shota. He's beaming at him with his signature smile, even though his cheeks are dusted with pink. Behind the boy are 9 of his students, all of which have remnants of tape on them, but most notably, they all have matching blushes on their faces. They all look everywhere except at Midoriya and Shota. All of them are a mix of embarrassment and shell shock. Well, except for Bakugo, he's got the embarrassment down, but he's murmuring angrily at his boots. Shota has to force down the chuckle that threatens to arise. He ducks his head into his capture scarf and side glances Nomuri, who's beside him. She certainly got what she wanted. The woman almost mirrors Midoriya's pose, but her smile is more of a smirk, and amusement practically leaks from her pores. He spares his own grin behind his scarf. Truthfully, Shota had expected this to happen. When Nomuri came up with the proposal, he knew what she was up to, but he didn't particularly care. After all, it would solve one of his problems, Midoriya's confidence. Plus, the entire situation was realistically possible, and it would teach his students a lesson about the power of bias. And then some about another technique that Shota would never dare touch, seduction. Someone had to prepare them, and who was he to deny Nomuri that chance? He already knows a dozen villains who have tried to use it on him. It's real, and if you aren't prepared for it, you'll end up just like the 9 students standing baffled in front of him. What makes this even better is that it's Midoriya who caused this. Not even Shota would have expected all those flirts, shameless looks, and slightly provocative actions. Gods, Shota had to look away a few times. Midoriya was just that good, and this was brought on by only a few hours with Nomuri. It was impressive, he had to admit. Though all he gave Midoriya was an approved look and a soft pat on the head, the kid already knows that he's proud. The teacher walks to Midoriya's victims. Yep, he means that. They still aren't looking at him, shifting nervously under his gaze. Another grin forms, and he lets them see it. "I'm looking forward to your reports at the end of the week, detailed and explained, just like usual." Their faces burn instantly. For Todoroki, he means that literally. The shit-eating grin on Shota's face gets even bigger. All right, everyone. This concludes the one-shot entitled Seduction Gone Wrong or Right. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I always enjoy the fics where Nomuri teaches Izuku, and they always amuse me. Let me know your thoughts and reactions, but as always, thank you so much for listening.